Hey guys, Kyle Millen here with STILLEN, and today I'm excited to talk with you about a product that we've been getting phone calls on for literally the last 6 years. In 2019, STILLEN released our TruPower cold air scoop for the Chevy Silverado. It was so popular that we immediately started receiving inquiries if we offered it for the GMC Sierra and for the 3/4 and 1 ton trucks as well. So we went ahead and made the intake scoop for those platforms also. Now here we are 5 or 6 years later, and during that time we've received hundreds if not thousands of phone calls asking us, when are we going to develop a cold air intake system? What I have in front of me is the end result of almost 2 years of R&D and testing that has gone into developing the best cold air intake system on the market today for the Chevy Silverado and GMC Sierra half-ton 5.3 and 6.2 liter trucks. On the intake itself, we were able to find 15 horsepower and 12 foot-pounds of torque testing on our chassis dyno here in-house. When we paired that with the STILLEN TruPower scoop, we saw a phenomenal 24 horsepower and 21 pound-feet of torque gain at the rear wheels. These are excellent results on a naturally aspirated vehicle, something we're very, very proud of. So why did it take us so long to develop a cold air intake system for the Chevy Silverado, right? It's just an airbox, a tube, a filter. How hard can it be? Well, when we do our engineering here at STILLEN, we do things a little bit differently. Before we began doing any of our development work, we wanted to get our baseline data. In order to get our baseline data, we needed to know what was it that we were trying to achieve. Well, we wanted to gain more power and more torque, of course. We wanted to see if we could get better fuel mileage. But we also knew that the factory Silverado intake system didn't have enough airflow in order to provide that fantastic engine with all the air that it needed. How did we know that? Well, the intake scoop itself was a restriction point. We found that out because of the development of our cold air intake scoop. Originally, when we came up with that design, we really just thought it was going to be a cold air scoop. We didn't really anticipate seeing much of a horsepower gain. So we went through the development work, we did all the testing on that, and we were actually really surprised when we put it on the dyno and we saw that just by opening up that front grate area and incorporating the scoop design, we actually found almost 10 horsepower just off of that scoop alone. Well, if the front end is that restrictive, then the rest of the system is probably restrictive as well. So the team started to go to work and we actually installed temperature sensors throughout the engine bay of the vehicle. Now, if we're worried about airflow, why are we worried about temperature sensors? Because we immediately knew that if we were going to be opening up airflow through the OEM Airbox, we were going to need to be doing so in the freshest possible cold air source that we could. If you go back through our history of cold air intake system development, going all the way back to the 90s on the 300ZXs, the early 2000s, whatever it may be, you'll see that one of our big goals is to find additional airflow outside of the engine bay. Oftentimes, when we simply open up a hole inside of an airbox inside of the engine bay, yeah, we're getting more flow, but we're doing so at the cost of additional temperature. Now that airflow helps, but if you're doing so at a much larger air molecule size, you're really actually not gaining very much. The Chevy Silverado and GMC Sierra have a really creative intake design. Off of this opening here, it goes through a channel that goes up through the front core support and allows fresh air to come in through the front core support. While that's really interesting and it's a good concept, it can also be restrictive. You're basically restricted to only bringing airflow through that one location, through this port. Otherwise, pretty much the rest of the engine bay is sealed off. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to see where the freshest, lowest temperature air was within the engine bay. Yeah, we could take this, which is basically the way that this airbox is laid out. This airbox mounts inside of the vehicle right here. Intake tube comes in and goes straight to the engine. Well, we could put a big window right here and we could just add additional airflow. But now that air is coming within 6 or 8 inches from the engine itself. So you're going to have all that radiant heat coming off of your exhaust manifolds, your cylinder heads, all that heat's coming off and going into your airbox, really defeating the purpose of increasing that volume of airflow. So we wanted to instrument the engine bay with temperature sensors so we could see where is the lowest temperature possible so we could increase our airflow, our air volume, but also do so with the lowest temperature air that we could find. So during our testing and during the instrumentation of the engine bay, we found that the best possible airflow is right behind the headlight. Behind the headlight, inside the frame rails, there's an opening that we are able to pull through this window, and we're able to get fresh air that's coming in naturally through the vehicle. It's well protected by the wheel liners and the wheel covers inside of there, but it's going to be the lowest temperature air that we could find during our testing process. So once we had the Airbox design completed and we knew that we were going to be getting a larger volume of air with the lowest possible temperature that we could, we said, okay, now it's time to start to work on the intake tube. The OEM intake tube has a number of different baffles and mufflers and things like that going on with it that are good for a reason. They're there for NVH, noise, vibration, and harshness testing. Basically, what that means is they wanted that Airbox to be very, very quiet. Makes sense because they're trying to sell this for 1 million people and make sure that everybody's going to be happy with that design. But those air intake tubes can be quite restrictive and quite turbulent as that air works its way through that muffler system and works through all those different chambers. Yeah, it's going to be quieter, but it's also very turbulent. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to get rid of all that turbulence, get rid of all that restriction, and just straight line our air right from our air source directly into our throttle body. This is going to give a much cleaner airflow, much better performing, and overall cause the air to do less work. All of that work going through the chambers, all that restriction is going to really tumble the air, really slow down the airspeed, and ultimately cause a significant reduction in power. So we wanted to eliminate all that and give ourselves nice, smooth, fresh, clean air. When it came down to designing our final element of the air intake system, it came down to our air filter. And we wanted to do things a little bit differently again. What you'll notice with our air filter is we've actually incorporated not just the flange that mounts to the intake tube, but we've incorporated an additional flange that protrudes past the filter a little bit. And you'll see that it correlates with this flange that comes off the Airbox. So what's going to happen is the filter is going to go in and it's going to be mounted inside of the Airbox and apply additional sealing effect to the Airbox itself. So what do you get with a STILLEN cold air intake system? Well, you get your Airbox that's much improved over the factory design, additional airflow, cooler air sources, and overall better performing. You're going to get this absolutely massive, washable, and reusable air filter, your choice of either oiled or dry, depending on your preference. You're also going to receive the rotational cast polyethylene intake tube. You're going to receive the couplers needed to mount it to your vehicle. You'll receive the PCV hoses. You'll receive a mass airflow sensor extension harness so that we don't have any additional stress or anything on your wiring harness. You're also going to receive this rubber gasket, which is going to seal the mass airflow sensor directly to our intake tube. And finally, to finish off the Airbox, you're going to receive this very nice STILLEN polycarbonate window that just mounts right on top, easy access and easy visibility in order to see the condition of your air filter anytime you like. All right, so what's the net result? Everybody always wants to know, if I put a cold air intake system on my truck, what am I getting? Well, we've seen a few different gains for this particular cold air intake system. For the last year or so, we've been working with owners who have been testing this Airbox for us and letting us know how it performs in their environment. We've gotten great feedback about not only the power and torque that they can feel, but we've actually had a couple of those owners tell us that they saw an increase of 1 to 2 miles per gallon. In addition to the fuel mileage gains, the biggest gain that we can report is going to be on horsepower and torque. On the intake itself, we were able to find 15 horsepower and 12 foot-pounds of torque testing on our chassis dyno here in-house. When we paired that with the STILLEN TruPower scoop, we saw a phenomenal 24 horsepower and 21 pound-feet of torque gain at the rear wheels. These are excellent results on a naturally aspirated vehicle, something we're very, very proud of. Again, we want to thank all of our loyal customers who have literally been asking us for years now to develop the cold air intake system for the Chevy Silverado and GMC Sierra half-ton V8 trucks. If you have any questions about this intake or any other parts that STILLEN offers for your Silverado or GMC Sierra half-ton, please feel free to give us a call. We're happy to help in any way we can. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.